Most of you know that the New York Times is thought of as the paper of record in this country. How does that paper cover a case like the Nicole Brown Simpson Ronald Goldman murder trial, which has now become a staple for the tabloid media? It is a challenge for New York Times correspondent David Margolick, who's here in Los Angeles tonight. For 7 years, he wrote At the Bar, a column for that paper. A collection of those columns is out now in softcover. David, thanks for coming in. Welcome to CBS.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Let me ask you here about the tape that was so sensational in the tabloids this week, an audio tape with a conversation between O.J. Simpson and the police officers shortly after he returned from Chicago, I believe, following the murders of Nicole and Ron Goldman. In your view, how did that tape get to the media? It's my understanding that only 4 sources had access to it. That'd be the judge, the police, the defense, and the prosecution.
Well, actually, Tom, you know, that tape got to the media a long time ago. I mean, we're only hearing the audio tape of it now, but the transcript was out many, many months ago. I think late in the summer or early in the fall. It was printed in the Star, the tabloid paper.
But there's something about hearing the actual voice of the defendant and the police officers that goes beyond just reading it in cold black and white.
Oh, I think so. I think that, you know, in a case like this, inflection, demeanor are absolutely critical things. I mean, you can read something in a cold transcript and it's not the same. And when you hear it, I mean, there are 1,000 different ways to say the same word. And I think that if it's ever played for the jury, it might make a difference. I've only heard snippets of it myself.
How did this tape get to the media, do you think? I mean, through a process of elimination here, who would let that out? Probably Judge Ito wouldn't let that out.
Judge Ito, I'm sure, wouldn't let it out. I'm sure the defense would not let it out.
Probably Johnny Cochran and Shapiro wouldn't let that out, and
I think that's
Bailey.
Probably a good bet.
Yeah, probably Marcia Clark and her team, they probably wouldn't let that out.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably more anonymous hands in the police department than anywhere else.
You might think that, huh?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if I were a betting man, I'd say that's where it came from.
But it's funny how these things happen, and it's amazing sometimes.
And they usually come out sooner or later. In a way, it's kind of amazing it took so long.
You mentioned demeanor here, and even when you go beyond audio tape to video, if you see the expression on a person's face at certain moments in critical times, such as this trial, facial expression can give away much information that words would not. What about O.J. when they begin showing photographs in the trial? There was one story that Jeanette Myers told on Court TV the other day, which I didn't see, that there were tears in his eyes as he saw a picture of his wife's bloody hands.
Yeah, I wasn't in court when that moment occurred, but I've written actually about this kind of pirouette that he goes through every time there's a gory picture on the screen. What he'll do is that as soon as there's a whole ritual where the technician will say, cut the feed, and that's the signal that the picture is not supposed to go out on the air.
Right, and if you, by the way, making believe that this camera here, which is on you, would be, you know, if you could show the body motion that O.J. does with your own body, all the better for our...
Yeah, no, what happens is this, the technician says, cut the feed, and at this point, O.J. turns up like this, and looks sort of against the wall, and then the moment the pictures come off, then he turns around again, so he never sees any of them. And the way that I described it in one of my stories is that it's as if everybody else is looking at home plate and he's looking out toward the right field flagpole. He's completely disconnected from everything. And, you know, whether or not he cried, again, there were different accounts of whether he cried. I wasn't there. I hadn't seen him cry in court before.
One would wonder when he looks away, as you just described and demonstrated, if he's doing that on his own initiative or whether counsel has said, when they show the pictures, turn your head from them.
Yeah, you know, it's very hard to know whether he's doing it because it's just so painful. I'm sure that's what his explanation would be. It may be that, you know, everybody is going to study him to see the way that he's reacting and he can't win, and so he just doesn't want to be scrutinized. I don't know.
As you sit there day after day and you look at this thing going on, what are you thinking?
Well, I often think about how far we stray from the real guts of the case, which is that 2 people were killed, and we're trying to get to the bottom of what happened that night. I mean, there are many, many detours all the time, and it's very easy to follow the thrust of it. And how the jurors are doing it, I just don't know.
And as you watch this all unfold, what is the real story here? Is the real story the blood evidence which day by day piles up against this defendant and indicates that he and he alone is the perpetrator? Or is the running story here the effort of the defense to parry and thrust and to throw out the racism issue, to throw out the police handling issue, to throw out the sloppy issue? What is the story developing here as you see it?
Well, of course, the story is both.
Yeah.
I mean, the story is basically there's the simple version, and then there's the complicated rococo version. The prosecution version is just the facts, ma'am. It's just the blood evidence. You know, let's stick to that. Let's not worry about all of these other sideshows. And the whole defense strategy here is to plant as many theories as they possibly can.
And doubts.
Throw 1,000 things against the wall, not necessarily follow up on very many of them, just throw them out there. And it doesn't take very many doubts, and it doesn't take very many jurors with doubts, and you don't get a conviction.
Tracy Hampton, the juror who left this week saying, in effect, to Judge Ito, I can't take it anymore. What does that mean?
Well, you know, she was a very puzzling woman.
Really?
I sat until Judge Ito rejiggered the seats recently. I had a seat right next to the jury. And, you know, one of my roles at this trial is to try to describe for people what they can't see on television.
Right.
I mean, my role, it's a frustrating story to cover as a print reporter in a way, because everybody's watching, everybody's watching
I want to get
what
to
you're
that
seeing.
Yeah.
And one of the few things that I can see that the rest of the world can't see is the jury. So we all study them very, very closely. And she would sit there. I described her as someone who she was sitting as if for a 19th century daguerreotype, like this,
yeah,
where she couldn't move for 30 seconds. And she couldn't bat an eyelash for 30 seconds, only she would do it for an hour. She never seemed to connect with any of the testimony, with any of the characters, with any of the lawyers, even with any of her fellow jurors. I mean, we just never saw her interact. She would sit impassively hour after hour.
What about the other jurors? Do they you know, consult at all while this is going on, or talk back and forth?
It's funny, Tom. There are little sort of cliques of jurors that you can see. There are little knots of them. Some of the people who sit next to one another will talk, and you can see little cliques forming. But there are others who just don't talk to anybody. And, you know, one of the really puzzling things, and one of the things that I think, you get conflicting signals from them. I mean, for instance, the fact that so many of them wore black when they were unhappy that the deputies had been removed suggested a certain kind of solidarity among them. On the other hand, these jurors almost laugh by their racial or ethnic orientation. It's very strange. You'll find that when the prosecutors are making jokes, only the white jurors smile. I mean, this is a very peculiar thing. And the black jurors, for the most part, sit there very impassively. And the Hispanic jurors, and now there are two of them, are somewhat in between.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that sounds very simplistic, but that's absolutely the way it looks.
But then does it follow when the defense makes a point that contains humor, will the African-American jurors laugh?
Well, I think that back when Johnny Cochran was on his feet, which he hasn't been for a while with all of this evidence that's just been coming in, the scientific evidence, I mean, they clearly, most of them were very, very receptive to him.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, interesting. We're talking tonight about the O.J. Simpson trial with the New York Times correspondent, David Margolick. His book of collected essays is out now. It's called At the Bar. And you're invited to join us on the toll-free line, as always, at 800-952-2788, back after these messages.